Monday. We're here in what used to be our kids' corner, which is closed for COVID right now, but is a great place to play our skull guessing game. We've got a handful of skulls here that we want to go through with you to show you some identifying features so that if you find one on the beach, you can know how to identify it yourself. I did want to mention we are on the traditional territory of the Cove Combers First Nation here in Telegraph Cove. And yeah, here's our video.
So a couple things you'll notice is we are next to a construction zone right now at the Whale Interpretive Center. They're building a new kayak building, which is exciting, but does mean that you might hear some thumps or bumps or raised voices. So if you do, just ignore. Yeah, we'll just jump right in here. So our first skull that we want to talk about is one of the smaller ones. So if you found this on a beach, you would probably be on the west coast, because this little guy is not commonly seen on the east coast of Vancouver Island. So some distinguishing features about this guy: a really round head, and when you look in the mouth, big flat molars for crushing. And this guy is, if we look at those things together, we know that this is a sea otter because they need to crush things that have hard shells. And they have this big round head, which is much bigger than a river otter, which we'll look at in a little bit. And so we know that this is a sea otter.
Next, we're going to go quite a bit bigger. This skull here is large with a big sagittal crest, especially in the males. So that's really noticeable on here. It's going to have big, prominent canines, and then the rest of the teeth are going to be kind of peg-shaped. There's not going to be any molars. The specific skull is missing most of its teeth, but you can see the shape there in these two. So when we look at those things together, no molars, big canines, we can tell that this one is a Steller sea lion.
A creature with more teeth than that last one you'd probably find in the forest. So this guy here has a very long skull and big, sharp teeth. And you'll notice here, just like our last one though, no molars, sharp all the way down. The last ones are a little bit like molars, but mostly just sharp teeth. It has a long snout, which means it has a good sense of smell. This is all nose. And it does have a ridge there, just like that last one, which means, you can see here, this ridge here means that this guy has a lot of bite power. This is a wolf. And so all those things together, lots of sharp teeth for eating meat and hunting, good sense of smell with a long nose, and a crest here gives good bite power. This is a wolf.
Okay, next we're going to pick up something different again.
Where would you find this guy?
You would find this one on the beach if you were going to find it on land. However, you might go looking for it in the water. This one has a very long, thin nose. It's got a beak, and its nose is longer than its skull. It's got a very prominent beak. This one doesn't have any teeth, but if you were to find teeth, they would be conical because this is a dolphin. This is a Pacific white-sided dolphin, and you'll be able to recognize that by the really long nose. Dolphins have very prominent beaks. It's one of the three physical differences between dolphins and porpoises.
Yeah, so if we looked at a porpoise right off the bat, pretend you didn't know that this was a porpoise I was grabbing, you can see that the beak is actually about the same size, if not a little shorter, than the head. And it also has this much more prominent arch, which leads to a different face shape with these animals because they have this smaller beak. And again, as Jillian said, that's one of the differences between a dolphin and a porpoise. Dolphins have a long beak and porpoises have a rounder face. You also notice in both dolphins and porpoise, you have two holes here. This is the blowhole. And this is like just a moved nose. So if you want to pass me the wolf? If you'll notice in the wolf, his nasal passage is down right at the front of his skull. But if this guy was in the water, that means he'd have to lift his skull up to breathe, just like we do, like this if we're swimming. But so over millions of years of evolution, dolphins and porpoises have moved it's moved from the tip of their nose, like it is in land mammals, up to the top. And this allows them to just surface and breathe, just like we see dolphins and porpoises doing. So it's much more streamlined, and they don't have to lose their speed putting their head up like this. They can just keep swimming. So anytime you see blowhole, you know it's obviously a marine animal. There's no land animal with its nasal passage in the middle of its head.
Alright, so here we have another marine animal, but not a cetacean. This one, it's still got its nose right near the front of its skull, so it does need to put its head up to breathe. Does have a well-defined nose, though, and the tip of its skull is quite prominent.
Check out those teeth, too.
Yeah, they are crown-shaped. I will try and get up nice and close. So you can see that it has a number of ridges. These are excellent for grabbing onto things. It does have canines. This one is missing a few, but you can see a big canine there. And all of these things together, quite a round skull at the top here. This is a harbor seal. One of those ones we see quite often around here. Pretty different without all of that flesh on it.
Much less cute.
Yeah. So another creature here that you would probably find in
The forest is this guy. So you might think, wow, this looks like the stellar sea lion, and you would absolutely be right that they are relatives. A couple differences though. The stellar sea lion doesn't have any molars. This guy has a large number of molars. And you'll notice that there's less of a ridge on this guy's skull. It's a smoother skull here.
although males of this species
This is
would
true.
have a larger
You could
crest.
see a crest for sure, but in this individual, this is a female, likely, so or an immature male, hard to say. But there's still a little crest here, and a pretty sizable animal, much bigger than my head for sure. This is a grizzly bear, and this is a coastal grizzly bear. So if you found this skull in the Rockies, you could find a much bigger version of this because the mountain bears are a little bit larger than our coastal bears here.
And then for comparison, we're going to pull out a really similar skull. We've got those much, much smaller, but we've got those canines and we've got lots and lots of molars. And so this one's a black bear. Again, going to be a very, very similar shape. You've just got a small crest here at the back. But yeah, this one's a black bear, so you're going to see a lot of similarities.
The other thing to keep in mind too is that the reason we see so many molars in bears is because they're eating a lot of grass. People think bears are really scary, and they certainly can be, but they spend a lot of time foraging for plant material, and you need molars to be able to cut that up. For instance, the wolf that we looked at earlier, there's no molars there because wolves are really very carnivorous. Not that they won't have the odd bite of vegetation here or there, but it's really the minor part of their diet. And if you saw like a cougar skull or even a domestic cat skull, same thing. There's no molars in cats. And so with bears, though, that speaks to their diet being very omnivorous, just like us. Plants, berries, in addition to things like salmon and carrion that they might find.
Who else have we got left here? We've got a smaller species.
Here, let's grab our two last small guys together,
Okay.
and then we'll finish on that crest. So here's our little water creatures here. Jillian, go ahead.
So this one is quite similar to that last porpoise skull we had out. The last one we had out was a Dall's porpoise. You can see that our nose is similar to the length of our head, if not a bit shorter. This one is a juvenile, so this is smaller than ones you might find out on the beach. But this belongs to a harbor porpoise, the smaller species of porpoise we have in this area. But yeah, just really recognizable as a porpoise. You've got those two blowholes and the short beak.
This guy here is something you also might see in the water, although you might also see it on land. This guy here is a smaller, longer, what we would call rectangular shaped skull. It's not so bulbous at the back. And you'll notice that the teeth are sharp on this guy, that there's not those big flat molars like we saw in the sea otter. And that tells us that this is a river otter. So you'll notice smaller, longer, rectangular skull, doesn't have that big bulb at the back, and then no crushing molars. And that speaks to these guys having a different diet. Their diet is much more fish, and if they're in like a river, frogs and those types of things, insects, versus the sea otters that are generally going to be eating invertebrates like crabs or urchins or sea stars. Sometimes fish, but that's the minority of their diet, unlike these guys where it's a much larger part. And so they need sharper teeth to be able to grab onto fish and frogs, those types of things, whereas the sea otter needs to be able to have that really good crushing power. So these guys, it's relatively common for people to mix these animals up, both skeletal remains and the real animal. But if you see an otter, even if it's in salt water and not in a river, that is on the docks, it's scurrying along the floats, it's in and out of the water, it has a group with it of pups, that's going to be a river otter. Sea otters spend their entire life in the ocean and are only going to have one pup at a time. So that's kind of the distinguishing features on those guys.
So our final skull is here, and you can recognize this one by its very large sagittal crest. This one is similar to the stellar we saw in that, again, this specimen's missing some teeth, but it's going to have large canines and those peg-shaped teeth when it has them. And you can recognize this one, again, by that large crest. This is a California sea lion. When you see California sea lions alive in the water, you're going to recognize them by a very bulbous forehead. And so this crest really shows that in skeleton form.
Yeah, and they actually almost look like a child tried to draw a sea lion and got a little bit too bulbous on the head. Like they are kind of an interesting looking animal. And that's reflected in their skeletal remains. This is a much bigger crest than any of the other animals that we've shown you today.
Yeah.
So we'll finish on California sea lion here. And we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yeah.
Let us know what other skulls that you might like to see. This was just a sample of the skulls that we have here in the museum. And if you have other ones that you'd like to see, if we have them, we can post them in the comments with some distinguishing features. So let us know. Thanks, guys, for joining us.